Hey, Dan here again. Today I want to talk about compliance. Now in proposal terms, compliance is pretty simple. It means do whatever the solicitation, that is RFQ, RFP, RFI, whatever it is, do whatever the solicitation tells you to. Simply put, compliance means follow the RFP instructions to the letter. End of story. Okay, now if you're new to proposal writing, you have to understand that compliance is the single most important element in proposal writing. Why? Because if you don't do what the RFP says, you run the serious risk of being booted for non-compliance, eliminated from the competition, and I've seen this happen. Now, I'm constantly surprised to see even veteran proposal writers try to fudge this issue, try to beat the compliance issue. This happens most often when proposal teams come up with a new outline, a way to represent their story or the information in a different way than the RFP has told them to do. They think they have a better way, a more efficient way, a more succinct way, and it may even be better. But if it ain't what the RFP says, it ain't better. It's non-compliant. So, here's an introduction to compliance. Now, I have other tutorials that fall under the category of compliance you can go look at. For example, how to read an RFP, how to put together a compliant outline. But this is a basic intro to compliance. It's called Write for Compliance, or Do What the RFP Says, or Else. But first, let's take a look at what you'll learn by watching this video. I'll talk about how compliance fits in with CPR. Then I'll tell you what it means to be compliant. I'll give an overview of how to make sure your proposal is compliant, and then I'll show you how to be responsive versus merely compliant. Understanding this last part will help you give evaluators exactly what they're looking for in a compliant proposal. Okay then, let's go. Now, if you watched the tutorial called Give Your Proposal CPR, you may remember that compliance is the C in CPR, followed by persuasion, and finally readability. As I say throughout these tutorials, if you pay attention to these three concepts, you dramatically increase your chance of winning. Now, compliance simply means follow the RFP requirements and give the evaluator exactly what the RFP asks for in the order in which it asks for it. This is one of the biggest complaints, by the way, that evaluators have when they read proposals. Why can't they follow instructions? One of the easiest ways to show you're following RFP instructions is to outline your proposal according to the RFP requirements. This way the evaluator can take a look at your table of contents and then see whether or not you have lined them up point for point according to the organizational format they've given you. I talk more about how to do this in another tutorial in this series. Now, I've talked to many evaluators who tell me that the very first thing they do before they even crack open the rest of the proposal is to look at that table of contents. They want to see whether or not you are following the instructions. If they see that you have, they feel a lot better about going forward and reading the rest of your proposal. Let me say a little bit more about what it means to be compliant. First and foremost, it means do every single thing that the solicitation requires, even if it's redundant, simplistic, seems irrelevant, or sounds stupid. Now, it's not enough just to be compliant. You must also make sure that the evaluator sees that you are. So, compliance also means you need to show the evaluators that you have followed the instructions. Make it easy for them to see that you have followed the instructions. All right, let's take a look at each of these two a bit more closely. Do everything the solicitation tells you. The first thing you need to do is read and reread the solicitation. Remember, the requirements for what to include in your proposal may be scattered throughout the solicitation. So, before you plunge into writing, make sure you read the document thoroughly. Take notes, mark pages with Post-its, write in the margins, whatever. All right, next, read the reference documents. Many proposals make references to other documents that include requirements that you must meet in your proposal or when you win the project. Don't ignore these. I'll show you an example in a few moments. And finally, don't ignore boilerplate. Solicitations are stuffed with statements that appear to be standard clauses. Read them all. You're on the hook for complying, and there may even be something lurking that you have to put in your proposal. Okay, when I say
read and reread the instructions in the solicitation, what I really mean is pay attention to the details, because it's the details that can bite you. Take some time to look at this example. Pause the video if you need to. There are some very detailed instructions here, such as the requirements for tabs and the proposal title and RFP number. Also note the warning here that's tucked in at the end of this paragraph. Note that it says will be grounds for rejection of the proposal, not may be grounds for rejection. Unless you're reading the RFP carefully, you'll miss this.
Okay, quick message to all of you people out there who are in charge of managing the proposal process. You know who you are. You may be called a proposal manager, you may be called a proposal coordinator, you might be called the marketing coordinator. Whoever you are, your job is to make sure this thing gets out the door. Now you know that once the RFP drops, the technical people, the scientists, engineers, and subject matter experts, all those people who have the technical data inside their heads, these people are going to focus just on about two things in the RFP when it drops. Number one, it's going to be this product spec or the scope of work. That's the same sort of thing. And number two, it's going to be the evaluation criteria. You know this. So it's up to you to scrutinize the rest of the document to make sure that no detail is left unaddressed. You're going to have to deal with, for example, the page count. You're going to have to deal with the margins. You're going to have to know what the font size is both in the paragraphs and within the graphics. No one else is going to take a look at that sort of stuff. If you don't do it, otherwise, these requirements will be missed. Now, for those of you technical people who don't have the luxury of this sort of assistance, you're still on the hook for looking for these things. The evaluator out there doesn't care if the technical people are the same ones who kick the thing out the door. They don't care if there's someone running around making sure that all of the details are addressed. All they want to make sure is the details are addressed, the requirements are met. Because if they don't see the requirements being met, they will use that as an excuse to deduct points.
Doing everything the solicitation says to do also means read the reference documents. Here's what I mean. In this section G of a federal RFP, we are given 4 additional clauses from a document referred to as NFS, whatever NFS means. If you don't know what NFS means, you need to find out, because your proposal team, whether it's just you or a whole group, is on the hook for complying with the requirements that are included in each of the referenced NFS documents. A quick glance at the titles here are revealing. It looks like these NFS documents are applicable once you have won the contract, and this means you probably will not have to address the requirements in the proposal itself. But do not assume this. You must find out what these documents are and what they require. Ignoring them is like having a proposal death wish. Part of doing everything a solicitation tells you to do also means don't ignore boilerplate. As I said before, solicitations are filled with what looks like standard RFP boilerplate. That doesn't mean you can ignore it. Again, here's an example. Pause the video and read this excerpt. This requirement was stuck in the back of an RFP under a heading called Proposal Conditions. The insurance requirement subsection was at the end of a list of boilerplate that included such items as the City of Red Tree reserves the right to reject any or all proposals, and the successful consultant will be required to enter into a formal agreement with the City of Red Tree. Now, this is stuff we see in RFPs all the time, and we usually don't read it. We skim lightly over it and go, okay, whatever. The technical staff certainly would never get this far in the RFP. They stop at the scope of work. But you're still on the hook for this requirement. Respondents shall attach to their proposal evidence that they can meet and maintain these insurance limits. The team that wrote the proposal responding to this RFP didn't see it. They lost. Why? Well, because they were judged non-compliant. All they had to do was photocopy the relevant insurance documents and attach the photocopy to the proposal. It didn't even affect page count. So, making sure you unearth and follow all the requirements is crucial. It's also critical that you show you have followed the instructions. Now, there are some easy ways to do this. The easiest is to follow the outline the RFP sets for you. There's another tutorial on how to outline your proposal that gets into the details. However, there are also other things you can do, such as announce your compliance up front. Use intro paragraphs to describe section organization, for example. Sometimes the instructions might be unclear, and an outline for the proposal is ambiguous. In those cases, you need to come up with the best outline you can that corresponds to what they are asking for. When I do this, I often make a statement at the front of the proposal that explicitly states that we have tried to organize the sections as close to what we thought their intent was. For example, the following sections of our proposal correspond with RFP Section 3.1 proposal format. Because RFP Section 3.1 did not include items D and E from RFP Section 4.0 evaluation criteria, we've included them in our outline as Section 5.0 and 6.0 respectively. Yes, this takes up precious real estate in your proposal. And yes, it's not very elegant in terms of writing style, but it is practical. It announces clearly that we have fiddled with strict instructions of the RFP, not to delete and not to change the structure in order to give us some advantage, but to add what appears obvious that the evaluators need to judge our proposal. This tactic puts into practice that old saying about technical writing. First you tell them what you're going to tell them, then you tell them, then you tell them what you told them. Okay, another way you can show compliance is to provide a cross-reference matrix. Use a table to map proposal sections to RFP requirements. These days, federal agencies often require this to accompany proposals. It makes it easy for the evaluator to look for the requirements they are interested in and find the exact section in your proposal where you address it. Oh, by the way, a cross-reference matrix is also a great way for you to keep track of RFP requirements and where they belong in the proposal. This is especially helpful in big RFPs. Now, I talk about how to build a cross-reference matrix in another tutorial. Finally, you can show the evaluator that you are compliant by citing RFP sections within the document. You can include RFP paragraph numbers after the section headings or after the paragraphs themselves. Here are a couple examples of what I mean by this. This is an excerpt from a proposal where we inserted the RFP requirement just after the section heading. This way, the evaluator is very clear that here is where we answer the mail for that specific requirement. Now here's an example where we tag the RFP requirements after the paragraph. Again, it's a clear message that here is where we address these requirements. These tactics can help point your readers to where you have addressed the RFP requirements. But just addressing them is not always enough. There's a difference between being compliant versus being responsive. Now, I've seen many proposals lose because while the writers addressed each requirement in the RFP, the evaluators did not feel that the write-ups were responsive enough for them to truly assess the team's ability to do the work. Let me explain the difference. It's important. Being compliant means you address each requirement. You leave nothing out. You include all the stuff the RFP has said you must include in the proposals. Being responsive, however, means going beyond mere compliance. In a responsive proposal section, you address each requirement and you give enough detail for the evaluator to assess your ability to meet the product or project requirements. The bottom line is, to score the most points, you must be both compliant and responsive. All right, let's take a look at a couple of examples. Here's an RFP requirement. The proposer must be able to deliver a preliminary design within 60 days after project start. This is what the client demands, and it's included in the instructions for preparing the proposal. Therefore, a team proposing on this job must address it. Now, here's a response to this requirement that showed up in a proposal that I was asked to review. We will meet the 60-day schedule to deliver a preliminary design. When I said that this wasn't enough, the writer said, hey, I'm being compliant. They want a design within 60 days and we'll give it to them. What more do they want? Now, he was being what we call a proposal parrot. He was being compliant insofar as he addressed the requirement, but what he essentially did was simply repeated the requirement back. He was not being responsive. Now, here's what we ended up sending out. Same RFP requirement, and a responsive write-up. Take a few minutes to read this. Pause the video if you need to. In this example, the evaluator can clearly see how we intend to meet this requirement. And notice a couple of other things about this. We knew that 60 days was a short turnaround for a preliminary design. By adding this word aggressive here, we can indicate to the evaluator that we know that it's a tight schedule and that we will take measures to meet it. In addition, the whole second paragraph is an opportunity for the team to showcase its team-building approach, as well as to highlight Robin Noyes, who has had a successful track record with this client. Yes, it adds to the page count, but the team made a calculated decision to add words here because this was important to show responsiveness to how we would meet this requirement, and to take some detail out in various other places in the proposal. Okay, this has all been an intro into compliance. Now I've included other tutorials that describe how you can make your proposals more compliant and responsive. But let's summarize this. First, compliance is critical because evaluators use non-compliance to eliminate proposals. Remember that it's the first thing they look for in the process of elimination. Compliance means finding and responding to all requirements. Be rigorous in looking for requirements. They show up in the unlikeliest of places. You also need to make sure evaluators know you are 100% compliant. Don't assume they will assume you are. In some cases, you need to show them that you are. And finally, compliance plus responsiveness is key to success. Don't be an RFP parrot. It's not enough to say, hey, sure, we'll meet that requirement, no sweat. You have to show how you will meet that requirement.
You can always send questions and comments via the form on the page. And don't forget to check out the rest of the videos. And until next time, happy proposaling.